Good evening. I'm going to speak for myself, but I might be speaking for a lot of you all as well. I am really glad that Josh took a different job a few weeks back, and he's able to be with us on Wednesday night and sing songs that none of us knew. He's really good at that. So he did sing a solo. We should have stood up and cheered for you after that one, but it was good. That was a good song, and but I do appreciate Josh you being here with us to sing, and it does give a little bit different variation on Wednesday night as well. So I appreciate you for that. I told a couple people that with the storms and such coming in, we'll go a little quicker. I'm gonna be tickled to death for that. So I'm just kidding. But we will. If you see thunder and lightning or anything, we'll try to wrap it on up. We've been talking about miracles of Jesus, and like I said last week, I changed I kind of changed the path we were going to go. Instead of doing them sort of grouped the way that they were, rather we would go in chronological order. So we did week 1, then we had week 3 and week 2. So we're going to be back in order from now forward. It should be. This is our 4th one. And this is the title, The Man with the Unclean Spirit. Our target for tonight is going to be in the book of Mark, the 1st chapter, if you want to be turning there. But we will be in a few different other places along the way as well. So just a couple of things here as we get started. To start with, this takes place at the synagogue at Capernaum. And when I was making I think I realized that last week I had included a picture of the synagogue at Capernaum. And so we'll see it again. So bottom line is, if you had been around the synagogue at Capernaum, you would have seen a of Jesus' teaching. I do want to say the synagogue is a Jewish place of worship. Some people confuse the synagogue and the temple. And the synagogue was the sort of the entity where you would go and worship, a bigger complex, for lack of a better word. You know, the synagogue might be at the temple, but there was also, the temple in many ways was like the town square in some places, where there was trade and there was interaction that took place as well. That's probably a fair comparison. Right. Absolutely. And so the temple was in its one spot in the synagogue because it was I guess the temple could have served as a synagogue if every single Jewish person lived within 2 minutes of the temple. But it didn't make a lot of sense if if the temple, for instance, was in Louisville and you lived in Stanford, that would be inconvenient. And so the synagogue was the place of worship. I like how you use the word church there. The term church, though, is a strictly Christian term, but we think it helps us to sort of think in that way as a place to come together to worship. So as we talked about, when Jesus had started his earthly ministry, he left Nazareth, he went to Capernaum, which is by the Sea of Galilee. We talked a little bit about that. I'll blow that up in a second. But I wanted you to see all of this. This is pretty much just modern day Israel right here up and down this left-hand side. So if you hear Israel, if you see Israel on the news or something like that, this side of the picture is modern day Israel. And so Jesus, in his travels around, in his preaching and teaching, he sort of went around a good portion of what we would say is modern day Israel. We don't see Jesus as much in the southern half, but nonetheless, he was in that area there quite a bit. But the Sea of Galilee is the starting point, as it were. And where these places that we're talking about, this Capernaum, where Jesus was, Nazareth, where he was, these are villages within the borders of Zebulun and Naphtali. Is it Naphtali or Naphtali? Man, I say Naphtali, but it's one of those things you look it up and you get 10 different descriptors of it. These were the what? What are these names? Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon. Do we know what those? That's the 12 tribes of Israel. And this map is a general location of where these folks would have lived. Now, there will probably be some movement here and there, but this is a general location. And when you look at it, some of the areas were larger, some of the areas were smaller, but Naphtali and Zebulun. And so if we blow that up just a little bit, you can see here is the Sea of Galilee, and then Naphtali and Zebulun are both to the west of the Sea of Galilee. So give you an idea of maybe where we are looking at. Now, the bottom part here, this is a fulfillment of prophecy, which states that the land of Zebulun and Naphtali would be, by the way of the sea, would be made glorious in a latter time. We'll see that right about here. This is Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. Isaiah 9, 1 and 2. Lucille, do you care to read Isaiah 9, 1 and 2? Naphtali. And so this is reflecting here that the people who walked in darkness, this area, we sort of read that they had been treated poorly, perhaps. They lived in an area that life had not been real kind for them. But on the flip side of that, something good would come from that. You know, whenever we hear, whenever Jesus is called and the disciples, they ask, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Well, that's sort of a way of saying, you know, that place is always something bad going on right there. We have places like that in our communities or in our state or in our country where we would have a negative. If somebody said, I'm from here or there, we might have a negative impression. But we see there that these people that had walked in darkness have seen a great light, and those who dwelt in the land of shadow, upon them the light is shine. And that's where Jesus would come out of. And so we talk about this man with the unclean spirit, and that's what our target is going to be tonight. Jesus on this occasion was teaching in a synagogue on a Sabbath day, and he heals a man possessed by a demon. Now, I want you to just look at that sentence. Is there anything controversial about the first sentence right here? Mm-hmm. It was not lawful to heal on the Sabbath. Now, that was not an old law interpretation. It was interpretation, I guess. It was a thing that had been put in place by the Pharisees. And we've talked about that in classes before, that you were limited as to what you could do on the Sabbath. And people would work really hard until Friday evening to get everything done because you were limited as to how far you could go and what you could do and whatever. But think about that sentence for just a second. Healed a man, but it was not allowed. Mary. So I think your whole focus on the Sabbath was to be sort of centered around your faith, the old law, sort of learning more. Your sole focus should be on that. So I think teaching would be, would be acceptable in that case. But it was healing that was not permitted. So can you imagine how disappointing it would be if you were to go to the doctor's office and it were to be closed? What if if you're sick and you go to the doctor and it's closed? What's the first thing that pops into your head? Why are they closed, right? Why would we be upset if we were sick and we went to the doctor and it was closed? We need help, right? We need help. And I feel bad enough to go to the doctor. I need medicine or whatever it is that I would want to go there right now. And it's almost impossible to find a doctor's office that's closed, because there are places that are open at night, and there are places that are open at day, and there are places that are open 24 hours. But in this case, Jesus heals a man who was possessed by a demon, but he's, in a sense, he's going to be fussed at about this. Were you going to say something, Ben? Right. Absolutely. Yes, sir. And if you're not careful, when you have enough laws created, you can always find something about anybody, right? Well, what we see right here is the same sort of thing. And so a lot of these miracles that Jesus performs, if we want to use that word right there, involves demons. They're also called unclean or wicked spirits, evil spirits, devils. We said at the beginning of this class a few weeks back that I'm not necessarily as concerned with the how as the why, okay? And so we don't need to dive too deep into the how, but there's clearly some kind of something that is demon possession of some kind that people dealt with. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. No, yeah, but we sometimes implement those same laws in the church even today? We do. Right. And if you think about that, those things that become tradition, we become more bound by those often than we do I know what the Bible says, but this is what we've always done, sort of goes away. So whatever these demons were, we see several times that Jesus will communicate. He will talk at them or to them as just the same as me or you talking back and forth with each other. And like I said, I don't want to dive too deep into the how because I don't know the how on this, but there's clearly a method of communication. They seem to have some kind of knowledge of Jesus. They exhibit desires. They have personalities, passions. We'll see that. Jesus seemed to recognize them as distinct, though, from a disease or an illness. And again, I wasn't there. I don't know how this worked, and I'm not necessarily proclaiming to know, but there is a way of communication here with Jesus in these issues. Thoughts on any of that before we go a little further? Isaac Hall, the last time he was here, spoke sort of about this, not 100% exactly the same about this, but he kind of gave, and so I'm leaning on, hoping y'all's listening to what he said. That way I don't have to say repeat or anything right here. Other thoughts on this, though? I think it's fair to say, though, and if you look at any other mentions of demons in the New Testament, that whatever it was and whatever you think about it, it was clear that the people were suffering who was dealing with this. That sometimes some people have illnesses or things, and they are clearly suffering from it. And the one thing you really want is for them to be able to fix this, whatever it would be. And these people that are possessed in this situation, if we want to use that word, these people are clearly struggling with whatever it is that they are dealing with. This picture I had last week is a picture of the synagogue at Capernaum. If you look at sort of the, it's kind of fancy, I think right there. What stands out to you in this picture? The people here on the side? Well, I think they would probably have been inside had the roof been on it, a couple thousand years back. Anything else? It's pretty fancy. It's pretty ornate, these columns that are here. Well, this is thousands of years old, so the roof is gone. And so this is what's remaining of it. So it would have been, by all accounts, that's what it would have been. And these are common throughout sort of the Mediterranean world, these synagogues. Where part of the reason is like you look at these big columns and all that, it takes a long time for that stuff to grind down. And if it doesn't get an earthquake or something like that, you don't see it. But this would have been a pretty nice place. I thought the picture was neat right there of that. This is just a picture of it. This is titled "The Exorcism at the Synagogue at Capernaum." If you think about the stories that we read in the Bible, how long people have been reading about them. This was painted in 1040 AD. So it's almost 1,000 years ago this was painted. It's a fresco painted on the wall in a place in Austria. So whenever we study these stories, the people have been reading and studying about them for a long time right there. So I want to get into the reading of this. And what is the story right here? So this is Mark chapter 1, verses 21 through 28. We're going to talk about what this miracle, as it were. But what I really want you to think about is I want you to think about the approach that Jesus uses in this, okay? Think about the tone that Jesus speaks with. Think about the approach that Jesus carries this out with as well. Think about his maybe personality while we're reading that, if that makes sense. Okay? So this is Mark chapter 1, 21 through 28. Jill, do you want to read it? All right, so we got several things that we want to look at. We'll be in these verses quite often. So I want you to think about this first one. Mark chapter 1 that we just read, the first two verses. Why were the people astonished at Jesus' teaching? But only take your answer from those two verses, 21 and 22. He taught as one having authority. But then on that verse 22, it also throws a little extra thing. He taught as one having authority, comma, then what? And not as the scribes. So if you had just stopped and said, he taught as one having authority, period, then, well, a lot of people had authority. But the comma, and not as the scribes, makes a comparison that for the scribes was sort of a negative comparison, right? Not a great comparison in this. Does that verse sound familiar? Go to Matthew chapter 7 real quick. Matthew chapter 7. And in Matthew chapter 27, Matthew 7 verse 27 is the last verse of the first sermon, the Jesus' teaching. And so after he finishes, verse 28 says, and so it was, Jesus had ended these sayings, that the people were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and what? And not as the scribes. We see that statement made again. And so Jesus teaching at the Sermon on the Mount is not the same as Jesus at the synagogue in Capernaum. But both times that he taught, it moved the people to recognize that there was a difference in his teaching than there was of what was being taught by the scribes. So I forgot that I had that literally pulled right up there that we could have looked at as well. But I want to keep that in mind, that Jesus is teaching with authority. Now, what did the man with the unclean spirit say to Jesus? Yeah. Why are you interfering with us? You aim to destroy us. Let us alone. What did we do with you? And so clearly Jesus' teaching here is sort of hitting a nerve, if we want to use the term that we would use today, with the man or the demon within the man, whatever it might would be. like I said, we can go way deep into that, but Jesus responds how? Yes, yes, that's true. That the demon had made a statement similar to that. How does Jesus respond to what had been said in verse 25? Be quiet and come out of them. And then the word there, rebuke, Jesus rebukes him saying, be quiet and come out of them. Now, those are the only red words in our scripture. That's all Jesus says. He says, be quiet and come out. Right there. Now, what then happens? He obeyed. And so we read in verse 26 then that the man sort of convulsed, right? You know what a convulsion is, right? Somebody, what does it mean to convulse? Yeah, sort of a shake, right? You know, you sort of shake. It's almost as if, like in this situation, something's just leaving. The unclean spirit had convulsed the man, sort of comes out, cries out with a loud voice, and came out of him. Then, yeah. Absolutely. If you go to Luke chapter 4 and verse 35, you don't have to go, I've got it up here. It's the same story. Jesus rebuked him saying, be quiet and come out of him. That's the same thing we just said. And when the demon had thrown him in their midst, it came out of him and did not hurt him. So it depends on if you're reading Mark or if you're reading Luke, how you interpret, convulse to me means something, but if you read the Luke version where it says it had thrown him, to me that's more than a convulsion. That's almost like that's almost like a seizure that we would maybe think about in some cases today. But nonetheless, this was what we say happened. Now imagine you are in the audience here. You're not the possessed man. You're not Jesus. You're just there. What comes to your mind when you see this? Yes, the pigs. Yes, they ran off the cliff, right? Yeah, that's absolutely. What are you thinking as a person who's just there when this happens? It would be scary, absolutely. Absolutely. I had a student a few years ago who suffered from seizures. And first of all, what sometimes we think about as a seizure, there's a million different kinds of seizures, and it's not always convulsions. But this little girl had convulsions. And it was the one thing that could kind of get the whole class. Whenever she had that, it was like, whoa, everything got really real. And it was very scary as the teacher. Then you got to kick into like, what are we supposed to do to help her, kind of a thing. But you're seeing something. The reason why it was scary is we didn't see it every day. It happened twice that year. But these people that were in this synagogue in Capernaum were seeing a demon-possessed person, which might have been somewhat common. And they were seeing a teacher in the synagogue, which might have been somewhat common. But had they seen the teacher remove the demon, so to speak, from the person that was possessed? Hadn't seen that yet. And so that would have been certainly something that would have caught your attention had you been there. The people who were amazed that the unclean spirit obeyed Jesus. Now, the last couple of verses, verse 27 and 28, what happens then? Verse 28, and immediately his fame spread throughout all the region around Galilee. Now, this is the fourth miracle that we've seen. Okay? And if we go back to what we've seen, what have we seen so far? What was the first one that we talked about? Do we remember? Turn water to wine. What was the next one? Last week we talked about healing the nobleman's son, right? And then what was the other one? It was 2 weeks ago. Again, we were out of whack there for a minute. What was the other one? The fishes, okay? And so we've seen like now 4 different things that are all completely different, right? These are completely different things. And so I like the word that the New King James uses right there. Immediately his fame spread around the region in Galilee. Now, why might that cause problems? Uh-huh. That's true. I'm assuming you're talking about like the Pharisees and the leaders, the notoriety, and certainly they are diminishing. What else could there be a problem with this when we think about this sort of fame growing? Yeah. That's kind of what I was thinking. I was thinking about like musicians or athletes or people of some similar fame. How difficult would it be if you were an NBA basketball player, for instance, to go out to eat with your wife tonight? How difficult would that be? Can you just roll in somewhere? Probably not, because odds are you're going to be about 6'7" at least, and everybody's going to see you. And there's that's Jimmy Kersey. He plays for the Celtics, you know. And then what are they going to do? Swarm it, taking pictures of you. Can you sign this? All we want to do is get something to eat, right? Well, that can become sort of like, I don't even want to go. Well, can Jesus say, I don't want to go because there's going to be too many people there? That's not realistic. But will there be people that show up to see basketball player Jimmy Kersey for all the wrong reasons? Will there be people to show up to see Jesus for all the wrong reasons as well? After the first one, water to wine, like we said, who knows? But now you're starting to see more of them, and you may start getting to see a group of people coming around that are freeloading, want to see something cool that they've never seen before. Maybe how can I manipulate this? We saw that with Simon the Sorcerer, right? Well, he wanted to, have that ability. How can I maybe do this? There's all kinds of, because people aren't any different today than they were back then. They were. And we see that quite often, right? That the scribes, and every time we see just about with the scribes and the Pharisees is they're trying to sort of knock Jesus down because they were sort of that. Uh-huh. Right. Right. So I know it's getting a little rough out, so we'll go ahead and ease on to the finish here. Some things to sort of take with us right there. But first of all, the teachers of the law, Virgil, you were talking about this just a minute ago with the scribes, they didn't speak with their own authority, right? They didn't necessarily they didn't speak with authority, but when they would start saying, they would teach, they would say, there is a saying, right? Or Jesus says something, you've heard the saying. Well, there is a saying. Or so-and-so said this. Well, if so-and-so said this, are you speaking with authority? Well, Josh told me that, am I speaking with authority in that case? I'm secondhand, I'm relaying information that Josh told, but we don't know if Josh knows what he's talking about either in this situation. The prophets, they would always say, thus says the what? Thus saith the Lord. We do the same thing, right? Well, today when we talk about, we read in Matthew, or we read in Acts, or we read in 1 Peter, we reference the same way. Did Jesus do that? Jesus quite often said, I say to you, right? I say to you. What does I say to you mean? This is not Josh, Jimmy, Lucille, and this is me saying. That's what Jesus would say when I say to you. And so when dealing with these evil spirits, Jesus sort of takes charge right there, right? He orders the demon to leave, and it does what? He left. The people in the synagogue obviously had not seen anything like this. And when those same people said Jesus spoke with authority, they were clearly referencing what? His ability to do some things that they'd never seen anybody do before. Had they seen scribes do this. Now, do you think someone had ever went before a scribe and asked for help? I'm not saying that's a scriptural thing. I'm just asking you a question. Right? And so you've got people, but you do have people that would have been sort of possessed or had some issues that would have hoped to have found some kind of help, right? But there wasn't much help that would have been found. So to start with, first of all, Jesus had authority, but he wasn't authoritarian. Do we know what authoritarian means? Kind of a dictatorship. We use that word a lot of times in my world history classes, and we talk about people from the past. He had all of this authority, but he didn't use it the way me and you would use it, right? How much power does it take to go to somebody's head? Depends on the person. But a lot of people don't take very much at all, right? It doesn't take a whole lot at all. And sometimes if we're not careful, we get a little bit of that, and we can do this as well. Well, who had all the power? Jesus did. But how did he use it differently than what we would do? He did. We'll come back to that in just a second. Yeah. Acted on it as well. Well, I think that goes into what I was going to say right here. First of all, with this case, in this situation, Jesus takes action immediately, right? When he sees what happens, he says, come out from him right there. Second, does he overreact in this? We don't really, that's why I said I wanted you to think about the way he handled it. He said, come out from him right now. Now, there's no hooping and hollering, no going crazy, no stomping and stuff and all that. And then after it's over, how does Jesus, what do we see Jesus say after it's over? Anything? Jesus doesn't say, did you see what I did? Did you see that? It feels like that's what it was, right? It feels like it's like, well, point number two, fell right back into whatever it was going to be right there. And so that authority, he had the authority to do it, but not the authoritarian to go around trumpeting what he had done in the process. Number two. Right. Some of you have probably known people that all it took was like a snap. The kid might have been sitting down the pew a little bit, but they went like that. They just shut it down almost immediately. This is what Ben was saying just a little bit ago, but he used his authority in a servant's sense. He used his authority to serve, not to be served. The guy that had the demon should have been coming to Jesus, sort of bowing down, but Jesus said, I can help you, not you help me. And sometimes when we have our authority, we want to say, how can you help me? What can you do for me? Kind of a situation. We have to do whatever it is. It's at the home, if that's at work, wherever it might be, you got to use that authority to help others. And thirdly, this idea of sort of walking with us. Jesus used his authority to do what? Help or destroy? Yeah, had to help those who believed in him. And sometimes, we talked about this a week or so ago, sometimes there's just a little modicum of faith, but it was enough that Jesus used it to. Was used, we said these miracles were done for what reason? What was the goal? What was the purpose? Spread the word. To help convince people, to help people see what he's doing. Absolutely right there. And so we don't necessarily have demon possession, but do we ever sort of become possessed with something? Something sort of overtakes our life. Yeah. It absolutely can. So whatever that is, it's not a demon in the sense that, maybe we're talking about in Mark chapter 1 here, but it is something that sort of, we can't sort of escape from it. It's things that we're maybe trying to deal with right there. And sometimes those things kind of, for lack of a better word, kind of cause a commotion in our life as well, right? They sort of cause us to get stirred up like the man there in verse 25 that we read there just a little bit ago. But we have to figure out a way to get rid of them. Well, how did the man get rid of the demons in his life? Through Jesus. How do we get rid of the demon possession, quote unquote, in our life? Through Jesus. Right? Through our efforts to try and get through that. And so whatever it is that is possessing us, and I don't want to use that word lightly, but I think you know what I mean. Whatever it is, we can find, hopefully in the scriptures, examples of people who have went through similar difficulties and trusted that Jesus would be able to pull them out, pull that out of them as well. So we'd invite you, encourage you, whatever it is, if there's anything that's bothering you, that's giving you difficulties, we'd invite you to come, and hopefully we can fix that. It might be through prayer, it might be through baptism, whatever it might be. We'd invite you to come while we stand and sing.